Well, today we're going to be doing an update on King Charles and just see what's going on, particularly with his astrology chart. Now, I was doing some reading about the royal family, looking at the news stories, and one of the things that I saw, and this was in several articles, was that apparently or allegedly Queen Camilla is worried about the health of King Charles because he's been continuing his royal duties. Maybe she thinks that he's doing these, going out too much and he should be resting more. So there was some concern there, at least in the articles I read. So what I'm going to be doing is focusing on what's going on there. There's some very serious transits that are happening for King Charles right now, the Saturn transit. And then there's a really intense transit that's happening in December that I want to bring to everybody's attention that I was actually pretty shocked and quite alarmed to see this transit. I hadn't caught it before. So this is going to be something new in my astrology videos. So for those of you that are new to my channel, make sure you like and subscribe, of course. I practice Vedic sidereal astrology, which is the astrology comes from ancient India, and I use a South Indian chart. So the chart might look a little different. So when you're determining your sign, you may want to make sure you're going to the appropriate calculator because your sign is not just based on the month and day like it is in Western astrology. It's a little more complicated. You actually can be any of the signs in a given day. So it's very important to know your birth time. If you're interested in a personal reading, check down below for details. And also, I just want to remind you all that this astrology readings for entertainment purposes only. All these statements about King Charles, well, these are all my interpretation of the astrological data. And also, this is not intended to be a medical diagnosis. Remember, it's entertainment purposes only. Well, let's go talk about the Saturn transit for a moment. And this slide right here, I pretty much brought it up in the intro there. News outlets have alleged that Queen Camilla is not happy, that he's doing too many royal duties. There's, some royal observers that are worried about his health, wondering if he's taking too much. As far as we know, and you all can correct me down below if I have the situation wrong, but we haven't, he's not necessarily cured of this cancer as far as we know. And so, he does have to be careful if we think about it, so this seems to be an ongoing crisis. And that's what the Saturn transit would seem to imply. Let's take a look at the astrology chart and let me bring that up for you. So the first thing that I want to bring up in the astrology chart, he is a Cancer ascendant. For all of you that are Cancer ascendant or Cancer moon, this is an incredibly intense period. So from January 2023 to March of 2025. So March of 2025 is when Saturn has been transiting the sign of Aquarius over here. And so for Cancer ascendant, it's transiting eight houses from your ascendant. That has a more physical type of situation. So for some Cancer ascendants, there's usually some sort of crisis that emerges during the crisis. Like, for example, some Cancer ascendant people could be facing like a financial crisis, like something where there might be, close to bankruptcy because eighth house can represent bankruptcy. For other Cancer ascendant people, like in King Charles' case, it's actually affecting the first house, which is the physical body. Remember, the eighth house can represent like hidden diseases or things that were maybe missed before. It can represent like dormant things that were like lurking in the background, that were, karmically going to emerge at some point during one's life. So that's something to bring up with this. Now, if you're Cancer moon, this is a more of a emotional or spiritual crisis that may be affecting you during this time. So it can be affecting you a little bit differently than Cancer ascendant. But usually the operative word here is there's some sort of crisis that's brought into the reality of the person whose astrology chart that this is affecting. And let me clean up the chart for a moment so we can bring up the slide for a second here. Let's talk about the eighth house for a moment. So the transit, like I said, was January 2023 to March 29th, 2025. It's going to be at the very end of the month. but eighth house is the crisis. And that what Saturn does is Saturn tends to freeze frame or freeze the crisis so that it can be dealt with. So usually when Saturn's in the eighth house, there's a problem, and it's kind of like a problem that doesn't get fixed for 2.3 years, which is, how long the transit typically lasts. So that's one of the things. Now, some of the eighth house crisis issues can be, like I said, it could be a financial crisis. I don't feel like it's that, obviously, in King Charles's case, but we have the cancer diagnosis. We have hidden diseases that can come forth during this period. There can be, in some cases, the eighth house can represent the marital estate, but that's usually would be for the first marriage. And so this is the second marriage. So it wouldn't really be affecting that per se in King Charles's chart. But this is the planet of death and rebirth. And when Saturn is in the eighth house, it's slowing that process down. So that process of, and on many levels throughout our lives, we go through metaphorical periods of death and rebirth of our identity, of who we are. So that's essentially what's happening. So King Charles, he may have had a certain idea about himself. He may have had a certain outlook. And this is definitely bringing a complete transformation and change through him, as it would anybody that goes through kind of a crisis of mortality. It really does bring a crisis. Now, what's particularly troubling about this period right now is that Saturn is retrograde. So let's bring up the chart for a moment. Some of you may remember that in Vedic astrology, when a planet is retrograde, it's actually more powerful. So let's draw Saturn again in the eighth house here in the sign of Aquarius. Now, usually planets are going clockwise in the South Indian Vedic astrology chart. When it goes retrograde, it's going counterclockwise. Okay, so most planets are going clockwise except for Rahu and Ketu. So that's a whole nother story. Now, the Saturn transit going retrograde, that started on June 29th. So it just happened, a little over a month ago, June 29th, 2024. And this is going to last until November 15th, 2024, the retrograde motion. So a lot of times what happens when Saturn goes retrograde, there's like the crisis that, Cancer Ascendant or Cancer Moon is in at the moment. It becomes more acute. It's like it becomes more intense. It's almost like Saturn is bringing up the final testing phase to before the end of the transit takes place in March. So there's a lot of difficult karmic lessons that are being faced when the Saturn's going retrograde. So it can bring up a lot of issues from the past, unresolved issues, karmic issues. So that's one of the difficult things about this transit. Let me pull up the slide for a moment. All right. And so the Saturn retrograde, June 29, 2024, November 15, 2024. Now, this is also influencing the USA elections. That's a whole nother story. We're looking at King Charles, but there's a lot of world events that this is influencing well. Because when Saturn retrograde, there's kind of a sense of like really difficult karmic lessons around the world. But in this case, it's happening in somebody's life. Now, Saturn rules, if we look at in King Charles's chart, it rules the eighth house, and we just talked about the eighth house, transformation, crisis, but it also rules the seventh house, and the seventh house can represent marriage. Sometimes it can bring about like a crisis of marriage just because it rules the seventh house, but I don't think it's as acute in this case because Queen Camilla is the second marriage. The second marriage is usually representative of the second house, So that's something to bring up there. But the seventh house does represent contracts. And especially when we think of an incarnation, it represents karmic contracts. That's why in Vedic astrology, the planetary periods that usually signal an end of an incarnation are usually going to be during a period of the second lord or the seventh lord. Now, this is just a general rule. There's many exceptions to this, but I've seen a lot of times it does happen. So when there's an end of an incarnation, the seventh house is usually involved. And the seventh house would be like end of a spiritual contract. The second house would be there's a certain amount of saturation that's been reached within the lifespan. So like an overly oversaturation of experience. So, essentially the incarnation is brought to an end. Now let's talk about the Mars transit. This is actually quite concerning. When I looked at this, I wasn't actually originally aware of this transit on King Charles's chart, but this is a little bit alarming because when Mars goes retrograde, when it stations on December 5th and 6th, around that time, it's going to be right over the exact degree of King Charles' ascendant. So let me bring that up in the chart for a moment. So this is a little bit concerning because Mars itself can be a destructive planet. It can be a planet of powerful change, of powerful energy being released. So it's a little bit concerning. Now, for Cancer ascendant, generally, Mars is a good planet. It rules the fifth house and it rules the 10th house. However, we have to remember in the moon chart, remember, especially when you're over the age of 50, your moon chart starts to become, quite powerful, and so Mars is in eighth from moon. And by the way, I don't know if I brought you over here. Mars is in eighth from moon and it rules eighth from moon. So again, that's a little bit concerning. So it rules eighth from moon in the astrology chart. Well, in November, Mars is going to be in the sign of Cancer, and it's going to be slowing down for the whole month. It's pretty much going to be staying in the sign of Cancer for most of November. And then by about December 5th or 6th, depending on where you live, the time zone, Saturn is literally going to be at 12 degrees of Cancer. So 12 degrees of Cancer. And it's just going to hover there. It's in that space where it's direct, and then it's going to go retrograde, and it just hovers there. That point becomes an incredibly powerful point. It becomes like an intense point of energy release. So that 12 degrees, if we look at his ascendant is 12 degrees. So there's definitely, we can say without a doubt, there's definitely a very important event for King Charles around that time. Now, because it is the first house, I am concerned about, obviously, the state of the body, because it is in the first house. So the slide here, let's talk about that. Mars will, so December 6th, 2024, for some people it'll be December 5th. Mars will station at 12 degrees of sign of Cancer. King Charles ascendant is at 12 degrees of Cancer. Powerful energy is released. Mars rules eighth from moon. This could be a very important date for the king. And because we already know that there's this prior cancer diagnosis, that's why I'm concerned about this particular date. So definitely, Mars is known as a planet that can, like Mars, it destroys things. Mars can bring in issues. Mars can bring up concerns. It can bring up powerful energy releases. So it's a planet that's considered a natural malefic. Now, in for Cancer ascendant, it's not usually that malefic since it rules the fifth and 10th, but for the moon sign, it rules the eighth house. He has an Aries moon. So the eighth house from moon is being affected, which can bring powerful, it is the planet of Mars is from the moon sign. It's the planet of death and rebirth. And then he has the Saturn transit in the eighth house of the ascendant chart. So this is a very intense time. I think that Queen Camilla has a genuine concern. I think the chart is vindicating that concern. He maybe should be thinking about taking it a little easy during this time, because I do see some difficult energies with the retrograde transit that's happening right now between now and November 15th, but also that date coming up in December. So he's got to be really careful and really take care of his health until then. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Of course, I wish the best for King Charles. Hopefully, not in every case does some extreme thing happen. Sometimes these transits happen, and sometimes it can be a more nuanced type of event that happens. It can become a personal, emotional, or a personal kind of crisis that we may not know about. So there's also that to bring up with this whole thing. So thank you for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.